On a frost-touched morning in March 2003, in a quiet neighborhood just outside Syracuse, New York, a young woman named Rebecca Hartwell left her small apartment to walk the 3 blocks to the corner store. She was 24 years old, a graduate student studying environmental science at Syracuse University, known for her punctuality and her habit of calling her mother every Sunday without fail. She wore a green winter coat that morning, carried a canvas tote bag over her shoulder, and told her roommate she would be back in 15 minutes to finish their breakfast. Rebecca Hartwell never returned. Her roommate would later tell investigators that the coffee was still warm in the pot when she first began to worry. The question that would haunt this community for nearly 2 decades was simple and terrible. What happened in those 15 minutes? The North Side neighborhood of Syracuse in 2003 was a patchwork of old working-class homes and newer apartment complexes built in the 1980s, connected by tree-lined streets that seemed to promise safety through their very ordinariness. The area sat just north of the main university campus, close enough that students rented many of the apartments, far enough that families still raised children on these blocks. In early March, the snow had begun its slow retreat, leaving behind patches of gray slush in the shadows of buildings and salt stains on car doors. The air carried that particular smell of northern winter's ending, a mix of wet pavement and wood smoke from fireplaces not yet abandoned for the season. Rebecca lived on the 2nd floor of a converted Victorian house on Butternut Street, sharing the space with her roommate, Jennifer Corso, also a graduate student. The 2 women had known each other since undergraduate years and maintained the comfortable rhythm of old friends who could exist in comfortable silence. Their apartment overlooked a small parking area, and beyond that, a row of similar houses painted in faded pastels. Rebecca's bedroom window faced east, catching the morning light that she loved, that she said helped her wake naturally. That Sunday morning, March 16th, began like most others in their routine. Jennifer woke first, around 7:30, and started coffee in the small kitchen while Rebecca showered. The weather forecast had promised temperatures in the low 40s, the kind of fall spring that appears in upstate New York before winter's final stand. Through the kitchen window, Jennifer could see Mr. Patterson from the ground floor apartment sweeping his front steps, could hear the distant sound of church bells from St. Patrick's on the next block. Everything was exactly as it should be. Rebecca emerged from the bathroom at approximately 7:50, her dark hair still damp, wearing jeans and a cream-colored sweater. She mentioned that they were out of milk, that she had checked the refrigerator while Jennifer was in the shower. The corner store, a small family-run place called Marino's Market, was 3 blocks south on Lodi Street, a walk Rebecca had made dozens of times. She pulled on her green coat, the one with the toggles instead of buttons, and wrapped a gray scarf around her neck. Jennifer would remember later, would tell investigators with precise certainty, that Rebecca checked her watch before she left. It was 8:05 exactly. The walk to Marino's Market followed a simple route, south on Butternut Street for 2 blocks, then left on Lodi Street for 1 block. The total distance was approximately 900 feet. On a normal walking pace, the journey there and back, including a brief transaction at the store, should have taken no more than 12 to 15 minutes. Rebecca was not someone who lingered or wandered. Her habits were as reliable as her Sunday phone calls to her mother. At Marino's Market, the owner, Frank Marino, would later testify that he remembered Rebecca coming in that morning. He was certain of the time because he had just opened the store at 8 o'clock, and she was his first customer. She purchased a half-gallon of milk and a newspaper, paying with exact change from her coat pocket. Mr. Marino remembered this detail because Rebecca always seemed to have exact change, a quirk he had noticed before. The transaction took less than 2 minutes. Security camera footage, grainy but clear enough, showed Rebecca leaving the store at 8:07, the plastic bag containing the milk in her left hand, the newspaper tucked under her right arm. She turned left, heading north back toward Butternut Street. She never arrived home. Jennifer Corso first noticed the time at 8:30. The coffee had gone cold. She poured it out and made a fresh pot, assuming Rebecca had run into someone, gotten delayed somehow. By 8:45, the new coffee was also cooling, and a small knot of concern had formed in Jennifer's stomach. She called Rebecca's cell phone. It rang 6 times before going to voicemail. Jennifer left a message, keeping her voice light, asking where she was. By 9:15, Jennifer stood at the front window looking down at the street. A few cars passed. A woman walked a small dog. The normalcy of the scene made the absence more pronounced. She called again. Voicemail again. At 9:30, Jennifer walked the route herself, checking both sides of the street, looking into doorways and the small gaps between buildings. Nothing. The milk and newspaper were nowhere to be seen. At Marino's market, Frank Marino confirmed that yes, Rebecca had been there, had left over an hour ago. Jennifer called the police at 9:42. The Syracuse Police Department initially treated the call as a routine missing person report. A young woman, gone for less than 2 hours, probably met a friend or made an unplanned stop somewhere. But Jennifer's insistence, her description of Rebecca's unwavering habits, elevated the concern. A patrol officer arrived at the apartment at 10:15 to take a formal statement. By 10:30, after learning the details, after hearing that Rebecca had left with only her house keys and some pocket change, leaving her wallet and cell phone charger, and everything else that suggested a planned return, the officer radioed for additional units. The search began in earnest at 11 o'clock that morning. Officers walked the route between the apartment and the store, then expanded outward in a grid pattern. They knocked on doors, asked if anyone had seen a young woman in a green coat carrying a bag of milk. Most residents had been inside, drinking coffee, reading the Sunday paper, oblivious to whatever had happened on their quiet streets. A few had been out. An elderly man named Thomas Garrett mentioned seeing a green car parked on Lodi Street that morning, unfamiliar to him, though he couldn't say exactly when or provide more details about the vehicle. A mother with 2 children remembered passing a young woman near the corner of Butternut and Lodi around 8:15 or 8:20. Couldn't be certain of the time, but thought she was walking north and seemed fine, normal, not distressed. By afternoon, the search had grown. Volunteers from the university arrived, students and faculty who knew Rebecca or knew of her, who understood that this was not someone who simply wandered off. They formed lines and walked through the neighboring blocks, checking alleys and yards and anywhere a person might collapse or be hidden. The temperature had risen to 43 degrees. The sun broke through the morning clouds, casting sharp shadows that made the searchers squint. There was a surreal quality to the scene. All these people moving and coordinated, rose through a neighborhood that appeared entirely ordinary. Rebecca's mother, Patricia Hartwell, received the call from Jennifer at 2:30 that afternoon. She and her husband, Robert, lived in Rochester, approximately 90 miles northwest of Syracuse. Patricia would later describe the feeling that came over her when she heard Jennifer's voice, shaking and tight, saying that Rebecca was missing. Patricia said it was like falling through ice, like the solid world suddenly giving way beneath her feet. They were in their car within 20 minutes, driving east on the New York State Thruway, barely speaking, each trapped in private terror. By the time they arrived in Syracuse at 4:15, the police had expanded the search to include Thorndon Park, a large green space about half a mile from Rebecca's apartment. Officers with search dogs moved through the wooded areas. The dogs showed no interest, found no scent trail leading away from the established route. It was as if Rebecca had simply evaporated somewhere between the corner store and home. The first news reports appeared on local television that evening. A young graduate student missing since morning, last seen leaving a neighborhood market. The footage showed police cars parked along Butternut Street, showed volunteers in small clusters, showed Rebecca's parents standing with a detective, their faces pale and stunned. The detective, a veteran investigator named Marcus Webb, spoke briefly to reporters. He said they were treating this as a critical missing person case, that they were following all leads, that anyone with information should contact the department immediately. Clears throat. Those who knew Detective Webb said he was not someone given to speculation or dramatic pronouncements. He had worked missing person cases for 15 years and understood the statistics, the patterns. Most people who go missing turn up within 24 to 48 hours. Most have reasons, even if those reasons are not immediately apparent. But Webb also understood the details that didn't fit. A young woman with stable habits, close family ties, academic responsibilities, who leaves to buy milk and vanishes. No financial troubles, no romantic entanglements gone wrong, no history of mental health crises or substance issues, no reason to run. The search continued through Sunday night under portable lights. By Monday morning, the story had spread beyond local news. Regional papers picked it up. The university sent emails to students and staff. Rebecca's photograph appeared on flyers stapled to telephone poles throughout the North Side. The image showed her smiling, taken at a friend's wedding the previous summer. She wore a blue dress. Her dark hair was pulled back. She looked happy and young and alive. Investigators began the methodical work of reconstructing Rebecca's life. They interviewed her professors, her classmates, her friends from undergraduate years. They spoke with Jennifer Corso for hours, going over every detail of that morning of the weeks and months before. They examined Rebecca's computer, her email accounts, her phone records. They found nothing unusual. Her research on wetland ecology was progressing well. Her emails were routine. Her last phone call before that Sunday morning had been to her mother on Saturday night. Their usual weekly conversation, unremarkable in every way. The physical evidence was maddeningly sparse. The milk and newspaper were never found. Rebecca's house keys were not in her apartment, suggesting she had them with her when she disappeared. There were no witnesses to anything unusual. The green car mentioned by Thomas Garrett could not be verified or traced. The weather had been dry that morning, so there were no useful footprints or tire tracks. The security footage from Marino's Market showed Rebecca leaving the store and turning north. Then she walked out of frame. No other cameras in the area captured her after that moment. By Wednesday, March 19th, Detective Webb stood in the small conference room at the police station, looking at the bulletin board covered with maps and photographs and timeline notes. 3 days had passed. The statistics were no longer favorable. After 72 hours, missing person cases that don't resolve typically mean something terrible has happened. Webb had worked cases like this before, had seen how they could consume months and years, how families could be destroyed by not knowing. On Thursday morning, a different kind of lead emerged. A woman named Carol Martinez called the tip line. She lived on Lodi Street, 3 houses down from the corner where Rebecca would have turned onto Butternut to return home. Mrs. Martinez said she had been out of town visiting her sister since Friday and had only returned late Wednesday night, had only learned about the missing student when she checked her mail and saw the flyer. She said that on Sunday morning, before she left for her sister's house, she had been loading her car around 7:50 and had noticed a man sitting in a vehicle parked across from her house. She remembered because the vehicle was unfamiliar, and because the man seemed to be just sitting there, not getting out, not doing anything. She described the vehicle as a dark sedan, maybe blue or black, and said the man appeared to be middle-aged, wearing a baseball cap. This observation placed an unfamiliar vehicle on Lodi Street before Rebecca left her apartment, before she walked to the store. Investigators asked Mrs. Martinez if she could be more specific about the time. She said she was certain it was before 8 because her sister expected her by 10, and it was a 2-hour drive. She thought it was closer to 7:50 because she remembered checking her watch and thinking she needed to hurry. The detail was significant but difficult to pursue. No license plate, no clear description of the man, no certainty about the exact location or the vehicle make. Still, it suggested the possibility of surveillance, of someone watching, waiting. Investigators canvassed the area again, asking specifically about dark sedans, about anyone who might have been in the neighborhood that morning who didn't belong. A pattern began to emerge, though it was more absence than presence. Several residents mentioned seeing unfamiliar vehicles in the days before Rebecca's disappearance, though no one had paid close attention. One man said he had seen a dark car parked near the elementary school 2 blocks away on the previous Tuesday. Another woman thought she had seen someone sitting in a vehicle near Thorndon Park on Thursday. The descriptions were vague, possibly referring to different vehicles, possibly meaningless. But the cumulative effect created a sense that someone had been in the area, watching, waiting for an opportunity. By the end of the first week, the active search scaled down. The immediate area had been covered exhaustively. The dogs had found nothing. The interviews had produced no clear suspects or directions. Detective Webb briefed Rebecca's parents, explained that the investigation would continue but would shift to a different phase, focused on following leads and building a timeline rather than physical searching. Patricia Hartwell asked him directly what he thought had happened to her daughter. Webb chose his words carefully. He said he believed someone had taken her, that this was not a case of Rebecca leaving voluntarily. He said they would not stop looking. The weeks that followed were a blur of diminishing hope and growing despair. Tips came in from people who thought they had seen Rebecca, but each lead ended in misidentification or wishful thinking. A security guard at a rest stop near Albany reported a young woman matching her description, but the woman turned out to be a college student from Vermont traveling home for spring break. A caller insisted Rebecca was working at a diner in Buffalo, but the woman in question was 10 years older and merely shared a similar hairstyle. April passed. May arrived with the real spring, the kind that couldn't be denied or reversed. The trees leafed out. Flowers appeared in window boxes. The world moved forward while Rebecca remained frozen in time, forever 24, forever walking home with milk and a newspaper on a Sunday morning. The case began its slow fade from public attention. Other news filled the television broadcasts. Other tragedies demanded the community's focus. Rebecca's parents returned to Rochester but drove to Syracuse every week, meeting with Detective Webb, asking the same questions, hearing the same careful answers. The reward fund they established grew to $25,000. Flyers remained posted around the north side, though weather and time began to fade them, making Rebecca's smile more ghostly. Clears throat. For those who have ever watched a case go cold, who have seen the active investigation give way to the passive waiting, the experience is its own kind of torment. The detectives don't forget. The files remain open, but the daily urgency fades, replaced by the slow work of reviewing old evidence, waiting for new technology, hopping for that one break that could change everything. Jennifer Corse finished her graduate program that May but did not attend commencement. She moved out of the apartment on Butternut Street in June, unable to bear living in the space that Rebecca should have occupied. She told friends that she still expected to hear Rebecca's key in the lock, still caught herself setting out 2 coffee cups in the morning. The trauma of that Sunday had altered something fundamental in how she moved through the world. She began driving everywhere, even short distances. She made others aware of her location constantly. Trust had become a luxury she could no longer afford. The Syracuse Police Department maintained the investigation through the summer and into fall. Detective Webb refused to let it become just another cold case file, just another name in the system. He reviewed witness statements repeatedly, looking for details that might have been overlooked. He contacted other jurisdictions, asking about similar cases, about patterns that might connect. He found nothing definitive, but also found nothing that disproved his initial theory. Someone had taken Rebecca Hartwell off a residential street in broad daylight, and that person had been careful, organized, possibly experienced. By the time the first anniversary arrived in March 2004, the case had settled into a grim holding pattern. The family held a memorial service at the university. Hundreds attended. Professors spoke about Rebecca's passion for environmental science, her dedication to understanding how human activity affected wetland ecosystems. Friends shared memories of her kindness, her reliability, the way she always remembered birthdays and sent handwritten notes. Patricia Hartwell stood at the podium and spoke directly to whoever had taken her daughter. She said, "We will never stop looking. We will never stop asking questions. You may think you've gotten away with this, but time has a way of revealing truth." But time, in this case, seemed only to deepen the mystery. Years passed in a kind of suspended animation. Rebecca's case remained officially open but practically dormant. Detective Webb retired in 2008, though he kept his own files on the case, continued to think about it, continued to believe that somewhere there was an answer waiting to be found. The reward money sat untouched. The flyers disappeared from telephone poles. The North Side neighborhood continued its ordinary existence, though older residents still remembered the young woman who had vanished, still felt a small unease when they walked past the corner where Butternut met Lodi. For Rebecca's family, life after March 16, 2003 became a series of before and after, a permanent division in their personal history. Patricia developed insomnia that no medication could fully address. She would wake at 3 in the morning and find herself unable to return to sleep, her mind replaying every conversation with Rebecca, every decision that had led to that Sunday morning. Robert withdrew into his work, spending long hours at his accounting firm, finding in numbers and ledgers a kind of refuge from questions that had no answers. They maintained Rebecca's childhood bedroom exactly as she had left it during her last visit home at Christmas 2002. Her books remained on the shelves. Her track and field trophies from high school gathered dust on the dresser. A stuffed rabbit she had owned since she was 6 sat propped against the pillows. The room became a shrine and a wound, preserved but never entered except for Patricia's occasional visits to sit on the bed and speak to the daughter who wasn't there. Clear's throat. Those who knew the Hartwells said the marriage bore the weight of the tragedy in silence. They did not discuss Rebecca's disappearance at home, as if speaking about it might somehow make it more real, more permanent. But the silence itself became a presence, an invisible third party at every meal, every evening spent in separate rooms. Robert would work late. Patricia would stay up watching television, not really watching, just filling the hours until exhaustion made sleep possible. They moved around each other, like polite strangers sharing space. In 2009, Patricia began attending a support group for families of missing persons. The meetings were held every other Thursday at a community center in downtown Rochester. She found some comfort in the shared experience, in meeting others who understood the particular agony of not knowing. One woman's son had disappeared on a fishing trip in 1997. A couple's daughter had vanished from a shopping mall in 2001. Each story was different in its details, but identical in its central horror. Someone they loved had been erased from the world, leaving only questions. But even within this community of grief, Rebecca's case stood out for its complete lack of resolution. Most of the other families had at least some evidence, some theory about what had happened. Rebecca had simply walked into a void. One of the group facilitators, a retired police psychologist named Dr. Helen Marsh, told Patricia that cases like Rebecca's were among the most difficult to process psychologically because the human mind struggles with absence, with negative space. We need narratives, even terrible ones. We need endings, even tragic ones. What we cannot tolerate is the infinite question mark. The years 2010 through 2015 brought technological advances that reopened possibilities in some cold cases. DNA analysis became more sophisticated. Digital forensics improved. Cold case units in various jurisdictions began re-examining old evidence with new tools. The Syracuse Police Department reviewed Rebecca's case in 2012 as part of a broader initiative, but there was simply no physical evidence to retest, no biological samples, no personal items left behind that might yield new information. Still, the review prompted Detective Webb's successor, a younger investigator named Sarah Chen, to take a fresh look at the witness statements and timeline. Chen spent weeks reconstructing that March morning, walking the route, timing the distances, trying to understand the narrow window in which someone could have intercepted Rebecca. From leaving Marino's Market at 8:07 to the point where she should have arrived home by 8:20 at the latest, approximately 13 minutes had elapsed. In those 13 minutes, on a Sunday morning in a residential neighborhood, someone had managed to abduct a young woman without anyone seeing or hearing anything unusual. Chen's analysis concluded what Webb had believed all along. This required planning. The person who took Rebecca had likely been watching her, knew her routine, knew the route she would take, knew the timing. The dark sedan spotted by Mrs. Martinez was probably significant. The question was whether Rebecca had been targeted specifically, or if she had simply been an available victim in a location the perpetrator knew well. In 2016, a tip came in that briefly reignited hope. A woman calling from Pennsylvania said she had been held against her will by a man in Syracuse in 2002 and had managed to escape. She said the man had kept newspaper clippings about missing women, that she remembered seeing an article about Rebecca Hartwell. The woman provided a name, David Keller, who had lived on the North Side in the early 2000s before moving to Scranton. The investigation into this tip consumed 3 months. David Keller was located, interviewed, and cleared. He had indeed lived in Syracuse but had moved in January 2003 before Rebecca disappeared. The woman's memory of the newspaper clipping was either mistaken or fabricated. The trail went cold again. By 2017, 14 years after Rebecca's disappearance, the case seemed destined to remain unsolved. Patricia Hartwell was 61. Robert was 63. They had aged in the particular way that grief ages people, adding weight beyond mere years. Friends noticed how Patricia's hands shook slightly when she spoke about Rebecca, how Robert's eyes went distant when someone mentioned Syracuse. But then in October 2017, something shifted. A woman named Lisa Brennan walked into the Syracuse Police Department and asked to speak with someone about Rebecca Hartwell. Lisa Brennan was 48 years old, a dental hygienist who had lived in Syracuse her entire life. She told Detective Chen that she had information about Rebecca's disappearance that she had kept to herself for 14 years. She said the information involved her brother, Thomas Brennan, and that she was coming forward now because her brother had recently passed away from a heart attack, and she could no longer carry the weight of what she knew. Thomas Brennan had been 39 years old in 2003, working as a delivery driver for a medical supply company. He had lived alone in a small house on Wolf Street, approximately 1 mile from where Rebecca disappeared. He had no criminal record. He had been an unremarkable man, the kind of person who existed in the background of community life without drawing particular attention. Lisa told Detective Chen that on the evening of March 16, 2003, she had stopped by her brother's house unannounced. Thomas had seemed agitated, nervous, had tried to keep her from coming inside. She had pushed past him anyway, concerned about his odd behavior. In the kitchen, she had seen a green coat draped over a chair, a woman's coat with toggle buttons. Thomas had said it belonged to a friend. Lisa had thought nothing of it at the time, had left after a brief conversation. But the next day, when the news reported Rebecca Hartwell missing and described what she had been wearing, Lisa had recognized the coat. She had called Thomas, confronted him. He had told her the coat wasn't the same one, that she was mistaken, that she needed to stop imagining things. Over the following days and weeks, as the search for Rebecca dominated local news, Lisa had struggled with what to do. Thomas was her only sibling. Their parents were elderly and frail. She had convinced herself that she must have been wrong about the coat, that it was just a coincidence, that Thomas couldn't possibly be involved in something so terrible. But doubt had lived in her for 14 years. She had watched her brother, looked for signs, found nothing definitive, but also found nothing that gave her peace. Thomas had continued his ordinary life, had seemed no different than before. And so Lisa had stayed silent, protecting her brother, protecting her family, protecting herself from the possibility that she was related to someone who could do such a thing. Clears throat. Now, with Thomas dead, Lisa said she could no longer live with the silence. She told Detective Chen, "I need to know the truth, even if it destroys what's left of my family. If my brother took that girl, someone needs to know." The investigation reopened with new urgency. Detectives obtained a warrant to search the house on Wolf Street where Thomas Brennan had lived. He had sold the property in 2010, and it had changed hands twice since then. But investigators hoped to find something, anything, that might confirm Lisa's account. They brought in forensic teams with luminol and ultraviolet lights, searching for blood traces that might have survived despite cleaning and time. They pulled up sections of the basement floor, examined the walls, inspected the crawl space. They found nothing conclusive. If Rebecca had been in that house, if something terrible had happened there, time and subsequent occupancy had erased the physical evidence. But the investigation didn't stop. Detectives began reconstructing Thomas Brennan's life in 2003. They obtained his work records from the medical supply company, which had since gone out of business, but whose records had been preserved by the parent corporation. The records showed that Thomas had been scheduled to work on Sunday, March 16, 2003, making deliveries to nursing homes and medical offices in the Syracuse area. But the route sheets for that specific day were missing from the files, and no one who had worked with Thomas back then could remember specific details about that Sunday. Investigators tracked down Thomas's former co-workers. Most remembered him as quiet, competent, unremarkable. One supervisor recalled that Thomas had been late returning from his route that Sunday, had clocked back in around 4 in the afternoon when he should have been done by 2. Thomas had explained that one of the deliveries had taken longer than expected, that he had helped an elderly patient move a hospital bed. No one had questioned it. The timeline was significant. If Thomas had been making deliveries in the area that Sunday morning, he would have been driving a company van, would have had a reason to be in various neighborhoods, would not have attracted attention. The medical supply company's service area included the north side. It was entirely possible that Thomas's route had taken him near Butternut and Lodi streets around 8 in the morning. Detectives obtained photographs of the delivery van Thomas would have used. It was a dark blue Ford E-Series van with the company logo on the sides. The description was similar to the dark sedan mentioned by some witnesses, though clearly different from a sedan. But memory, especially 14-year-old memory, was unreliable about vehicle types. Dark and unfamiliar was what registered. The specifics often blurred. In November 2017, Detective Chen sat down with Lisa Brennan for a detailed interview, recorded this time with everything documented. Lisa described the coat again, the toggle buttons, the green color. She described her brother's agitation, his insistence that she leave, the way he had positioned himself between her and the rest of the house. She said that when she had returned to Thomas's house a week later, the coat was gone. She had asked about it. Thomas had said his friend had picked it up. Chen asked Lisa if her brother had ever mentioned Rebecca Hartwell, ever discussed the case that was all over the news. Lisa said no, that Thomas had seemed to avoid the subject, would change the channel if news coverage came on, would leave the room if someone brought it up. At the time, Lisa had interpreted this as discomfort with the tragic story. Now, she wondered if it had been something else. The investigation turned to Thomas Brennan's vehicle ownership. In March 2003, Thomas had owned a 1998 Honda Accord, dark blue, which he drove for personal use while using the company van for work. Records showed he had sold the Accord in July 2003, replacing it with a different vehicle. Detectives tried to trace the Accord but found it had been resold multiple times and eventually scrapped in 2009. Any evidence it might have contained was long gone. But the timing of the sale was interesting. July 2003, 4 months after Rebecca disappeared. It was a functioning vehicle with relatively low mileage. There was no obvious reason to sell it, unless there was. In December 2017, investigators made a decision to bring the case to the public again, this time with new information. A press conference was held. Detective Chen stood alongside Rebecca's parents and announced that the investigation had produced a person of interest, now deceased, and that they were asking anyone who might have information about Thomas Brennan or his activities in March 2003 to come forward. The response was immediate. Dozens of calls came in. Most were speculative or based on general impressions, but 3 calls stood out. A woman who had lived 2 streets over from Thomas in 2003 said she remembered him because he had once helped her carry groceries when she was struggling with bags and a fussy toddler. She said this was in late March or early April of 2003. She remembered because she had tried to thank him with a plate of cookies a few days later, but when she had gone to his house, he had barely opened the door, had taken the cookies and closed the door quickly. She said she had felt oddly dismissed, had thought it strange that someone who had been so helpful on the street would be so cold at home. A retired postal worker who had delivered mail to Wolf Street said he remembered Thomas because Thomas's mailbox had been broken for several weeks in the spring of 2003, and Thomas had never fixed it, had just let the mail pile up until the postal worker had left a notice. This was unusual because Thomas had previously been fastidious about collecting his mail daily. The timing aligned with Rebecca's disappearance. Most significantly, a man named Gary Linden called to say that he had worked with Thomas at the medical supply company and had been friendly with him, had sometimes gone to his house to watch sports. Gary said that one time in the summer of 2003, he had been in Thomas's basement helping him move some storage boxes, and he had noticed that a section of the concrete floor looked newer than the rest, as if it had been patched or repaired. Gary had asked Thomas about it. Thomas had said he had spilled some battery acid from old car batteries he had been storing, and the acid had damaged the concrete, so he had patched it. Gary had accepted the explanation at the time. This detail sent investigators back to the house on Wolf Street. The current owners allowed another search. In the basement, forensic teams located the area Gary Linden had described. It was indeed a patched section, approximately 4 feet by 6 feet, slightly different in color from the surrounding concrete. The patch was not recent. It had been there for years, possibly more than a decade. Clears throat. On January 12, 2018, investigators obtained a warrant to excavate the basement floor. The work began on a cold Saturday morning. Concrete cutters and excavation equipment were brought in. News crews gathered outside the house on Wolf Street. Rebecca's parents drove down from Rochester, not knowing what they hoped for, what outcome would be bearable. Patricia told a reporter, "After almost 15 years, we just need to know." The excavation went slowly, carefully. Investigators removed the patched concrete, then began digging through the earth beneath. 1 foot down, 2 feet, 3 feet. At approximately 4 feet below the basement floor, they found fabric, green fabric with toggle buttons. It was Rebecca's coat. Beneath the coat, wrapped in plastic sheeting that had deteriorated over time, they found human remains. The medical examiner confirmed what everyone already knew. DNA testing matched the remains to Rebecca Hartwell. After 14 years, 10 months, and 27 days, she had been found less than a mile from where she disappeared. The cause of death was determined to be blunt force trauma to the head. The medical examiner believed Rebecca had died within hours of her disappearance. She had been dead all these years, buried in the basement of a man who had continued to live his life normally, who had gone to work and family gatherings and barbecues with neighbors, all while the woman he had taken lay beneath his feet. The news hit the community like a physical blow. For years, there had been hope, however faint, that Rebecca might still be alive somewhere. Now that hope was extinguished, replaced by the terrible certainty of what had happened. But there was also something else: anger. Thomas Brennan was dead. There would be no arrest, no trial, no moment where he would have to face Rebecca's parents and answer for what he had done. Lisa Brennan issued a statement through her attorney. She said, "I will carry the guilt of my silence for the rest of my life. I told myself I was protecting my family, but I was only protecting a person who did something unforgivable. I am sorry to the Hartwell family. My apology means nothing, I know, but I offer it anyway." The investigation into how Thomas Brennan had intercepted Rebecca continued even after his death. Detectives believed they had reconstructed the basic sequence. Thomas had been making deliveries that Sunday morning, had seen Rebecca walking toward Marino's Market, had recognized an opportunity. He had waited, positioned his van somewhere on Lodi Street or nearby, and when Rebecca walked back toward her apartment, he had approached her. Perhaps he had asked for directions. Perhaps he had claimed some emergency. However it happened, he had gotten her into his vehicle. What followed was unknowable in its specifics. Thomas had taken Rebecca to his house, had done something that resulted in her death, and had buried her in the basement, later pouring a new concrete patch to hide what he had done. He had then disposed of the milk and newspaper, had likely cleaned his van and his house, had returned to work as if nothing had happened. The investigation revealed one more detail. In Thomas Brennan's personal effects, found by his sister after his death, was a small wooden box. Inside the box was a silver bracelet that Rebecca's parents confirmed had belonged to their daughter. Rebecca had worn it that Sunday morning. Thomas had kept it as a token, a reminder of what he had done. Clears throat. On March 16, 2018, exactly 15 years after Rebecca disappeared, a memorial service was held. This time it was not a service of hope or remembrance for someone missing. It was a funeral. Rebecca's remains were cremated, and her ashes were scattered in a wetland preserve she had studied during her graduate work, a place she had loved. Patricia Hartwell spoke briefly. She said, "We finally have our daughter back. That is something. It is not justice, but it is something." The case of Rebecca Hartwell was officially closed. The designation was resolved but not solved in the traditional sense. The perpetrator was dead. There would be no courtroom proceedings, no testimony, no opportunity for the family to hear why or how or what Thomas Brennan had been thinking that Sunday morning when he decided to destroy a life and a family. For Jennifer Corso, Rebecca's former roommate, the news brought a complicated kind of closure. She released a statement saying she was grateful to know what had happened, but devastated that Rebecca had been so close all these years. She said, "I walked past that house dozens of times. We all did. She was there and we didn't know."